Good morning and welcome back to the Soul Tree Diaries. Today is chapter 2 of our series, the 3D Diaries. Thank you for returning and joining us again today. Last week was hectic. And busy and just a lot of energy coming through. Including in my video I did last week. I watched it back and it was a lot of information, but I'm going to put that down to the transition from the shedding of the snake into the fire horse of movement, and it all just came blurbing out. So this week we go a bit slower. You're a bit calmer. And perhaps you found this too. Because of course, after all, the fire horse is about movement. But fires flicker. And so sometimes they can flicker with intensity and sometimes they can come back down and just be that bit calmer. So if you're recognizing this energy as you begin to move through this year, then perhaps it could be connected to that flickering of the fire. Or perhaps you're perimenopausal or menopausal. Perhaps you've got teenage sons or daughters whilst going through your menopause. Now, isn't that just an absolute delight in nature? I have friends who had children in their earlier 20s as opposed to late 20s, 30s. And their children are grown now, and oh, how they smile as their children are grown. Or perhaps you're just, I don't know, in one of your phases of your female cycles over the month, and maybe that's impacting you. Or perhaps you're low on vitamin D or low on iron. I mean, given the Southwest's weather report over the last year, this year, the whole of this year, where it's pretty much rained every day, I'd say vitamin D is going to be a big old culprit for many things right now. So whatever it is that you've got going on in life, if life's feeling intense, if life's feeling transitional, or perhaps if you're full of a cold like I am today, perhaps you're just feeling it. So today we're going to go a bit slower, because last week we brought out a lot. Last week we spoke a lot about archetypes, how they follow down through families, about how synchronicities in life just like to show themselves and keep us feeling like we're on the right path in life. And so today we go slower. Now, I'm not normally the kind of person who'll push through when I'm not feeling very well. But I'm feeling I've got a bit of a head cold. And, excuse my neighbour's dog's barking. I have a bit of a head cold and I just feel like my system is cleansing. I'm a dripping tap. God damn it. So I am stocking up on my teas, with my herbal teas. Oh, an update on the shed as well. The shed is looking much better. There's our other chair. We've got 2 guests who are provisionally booked in. Well, not provisionally. One is coming in on the 5th and one's coming in hopefully in April to come and have some shed discussions and shed chats with us. Shed talks. I'm not quite sure what we'll call that series yet. Given that Andy's made me a sign called Shed Talks, perhaps we'll call it that. But who knows? Who knows? All right, let's get some tea going. Oh, I've got all kinds in my tea today. I've got cloves, cardamoms, fennel, licorice, star anise, ginger, turmeric. I was going to have a coffee, but my body was saying no, not today, love. No coffee today. So Let me see. What is the thread in the head today? Being a visual thinker, or a dyslexic mind, as the world likes to call us, a 3D visual thinker, I need to have a thread to bring to you. If I don't have a thread of what I'm going to bring, then you are completely open to the chaos of my mind and you will get all sorts of nonsense come through. So we have a thread, and last week was challenging trying to do this and use the script. So this week, the script is gone and you just get me and my nonsense. But it means that we'll have sense at least. And it'll be a bit calmer for me, not having to read the script. Because going from this kind of thinking, when you think in this 3D way, to having to read words and things like that, it's quite a challenge. I don't know if any of you are dyslexic yourself or if you have dyslexic children. But that hop between speaking from our visual space in our mind and having to speak from words is a big leap. So this week we're going rogue, we're going feral, let's go. I say that, I can't even remember where I'm starting. I can... Oh, dear. And I've given myself a bit of a time limit today because we're off swimming with the boys soon. So I don't have long, which is good because it means I just need to get this done. And I say that in the way of I need to get it done in a good time, not I just need to get this done, because that's not how I feel about it. I just need to get this done in a good time so it's not half hour long. Saying that, we're already 7 minutes in. Oh well. So I've had conversations over the last week with people who are just formidable women. They are women, incredible mothers, doing extraordinary things. And that yet they feel like they're at a phase in life where they don't really know themselves or know what they are or what they do or what they enjoy anymore, especially if you've been you do have teenage children who perhaps are less wanting of your time now. So all of a sudden look up and look around and go, oh, this is not where I left myself. I left myself 10, 15 years back there, but I'm also not that person anymore. And so it can be quite a challenging time for us as women around this age. And all kinds of things can get thrown up in our minds, in our bodies, in our souls. And so today we're just going to gently explore one of the patterns that I began observing as a young child with my pattern spotting mind. Whether that's dyslexia or visual thinking, who knows? I very much have a viewpoint that I don't believe that dyslexia is a disability, because I don't feel disabled and I never have. I have difficulty with many things, but if you put me in my element, watch me thrive. And I feel like the disability that we have is being put into systems that do not understand the complexity of a mind that functions in 3D. So, for example, you may read information on the paper In a 3D mind, we are reading the relational geometry connections around those words. We float around it, we see it from all angles. We can explore it in our minds to make sense of things. And if 1 in 5 children are impacted, or 1 in 5 people are impacted by dyslexia, that tells me that's not an impact. That tells me that's by design. It's a way of processing. My mind doesn't feel dysfunctional when I'm in this place. It feels very in tune, connected. I feel like I thrive when I function from this space. But one of the pattern spotting geometries that began in my mind started when I was around 6 years old. And this is when I discovered and learned some truths around my ancestral family past. And in an instant, when I was told that information, this geometry came alive in my mind. And I could see the importance of the whole family functioning together as one. But what I was dealing with was a break in that family line. Not just through loss, but I am a second generation to be raised in the military, so moving constantly. I'm a second generation to go to boarding school, so that disconnection and abandonment that happens through there. I'm only pausing because my mind's gone blank. Pause for good effect. Stare at the birds. So one of the patterns that I began spotting was when I learned that there was a loss in my family's past, I saw the break. I saw the break in the golden thread that comes down through family lines. And that our families and our wider families and the connections and the wholeness we have to that, it really matters. I mean, it really matters. And so in my mind as a young child, I saw the importance of this and I could see the impact of it in my home. And so my mind began pattern spotting, generational threads, the golden thread that comes down through a family where that wisdom, that wise, that wholeness, the protection, the safety, the thriving of a whole family matters. And that information coming down through the generations to the next is really important. And when there's a break in that, it matters. It matters a lot, because when you remove the golden thread of life and there's no light to pass down through, you're left with a shadow instead. And so over the years, my mind has explored this generational family pattern in many different ways, observing relational behaviours, our different personality, character behaviours, our different facial types, body types. My mind has pattern spotted the impact of our ancestors and the golden threads or the black shadows that get passed down through our family lines. And now we won't go into all of those little idiosyncrasies today because there's far too many of them and it's too big a subject. But to just look at it as a broader, bigger subject, that it matters what happens in your ancestral past. Let's take, for example, 2 examples of this. So say you have a grandfather from the war who was suffering PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, as many of them did after the war, and many of them were classed as shell-shocked. There was no word for trauma or help to help them recover and heal. Instead, they were put in asylums, shell-shocked, pushed them out the way, or shut them away. We don't want to see these people who are shell-shocked in our lives. When someone is suffering from shell shock or PTSD, this is something that's impacting their mind. But it doesn't just show up in their mind, it shows up in their behavior. It shows up in their communication. It shows up in their language. Now, as children, we are designed by nature to learn by cause and effect, by our environments, by the behavior patterns, by the emotional connections of those around us. So, if you had a father who was suffering from PTSD or shell shock, and they became shut in, and they started drinking, and everyone had to tiptoe around them, walk on eggshells to not make them blow up. The behavior patterns of PTSD get passed down through the family line. Not the PTSD, the impact in the brain, but the behavior patterns get passed down. So you can have someone 2 generations down who's presenting with PTSD and shell shock because they may be shut down. They may be drinkers. They may isolate themselves, may not talk. They might have heightened anxiety. But yet they don't have PTSD. They've picked up the epigenetics of the family's past. That's just one example of how these threads pass down through family lines and the importance of it. Now, another example of this is bipolar disorder. Someone who doesn't have that ability to regulate their emotions. They live in their dorsal vagus, and then they live right up in their happy place in the other vagus. And they switch between the two with no balance in between. And they are diagnosed, they've got bipolar disorder. And then what happens if they have children and they live in that state? The child mirrors this because that's what we know. That's the experience of life. That's the feelings that it's brought us. That's all we know. So there's many different ways in which we can see the impact of behaviours and disorders coming down through family lines and having a deep impact. But what about when there's things missing? Like literally things are missing from that family experience. Well, that causes a developmental trauma too. If there is not that whole rooted family around you that has an impact, these things are important. And so this pattern spotting that I began in my mind, well, how did I have anything to reference it to growing up in the military and boarding school? How did I have anything to reference that to? Well, for me, that's where my mind turned to nature. There's many mammals living out there in the world. We're not the only ones. Oh, hello, Robin. You look like a different Robin. You've got a very red face, not just a red chest. Is it breeding season? Maybe that's why. Hello. He's flying around. There's another one down there in the garden. Maybe that's the female. Maybe you're the male. Ah, yes. He's watching over her. They're so sweet. Either that or he wants some mealworms. So nature. Sorry. If you look at the mammals in the wild that live in families, whole families, elephants, lions, all kinds of others, and you look at the wholeness of their family, you can see that in nature, If that thread, that golden thread, was not running through the family, the next generation wouldn't thrive. They probably end up having to survive or not. Because what comes down through the family really is important. And so my backbench, as things filtered through my mind, and they went through to this back burner movie scene and into the doorway of the generational golden thread that I was piecing together. If I couldn't find grounding for that in nature, then what I was processing was construct or concept by humans. And so that just sat there, out there. But in my piecing together of the importance of the whole family, it was nature that I turned to for the grounding, the validation, and the reassurance that what I was seeking was real. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always found zoos quite a challenging place to go to. From a very young child, I'd go into the zoos and they'd be quite a difficult space to be in. Growing up in the military, we of course lived in Germany. We did our tour in Germany, RAF Larbrook. Anyone else who was there? Hi. What an amazing swimming pool, hey? Oh, the summers I spent there. But we also went to a zoo. Well, many zoos, but we went to a zoo I remember. I just remember being probably 8 years old, stood around the elephant enclosure, stood on the side, looking in at these elephants. And I was mad. I felt so angry inside. I couldn't understand why all the humans were stood around the outside of this enclosure laughing and smiling and pointing at these elephants. Because all I could feel from these elephants was sadness. There was no joy from within them. I could feel the sadness of their souls rippling through my core. Now, in psychology, they call this mirroring, neuromirroring. Quite simply, because I was growing up in environments where I was also not captive, but I grew up in environments that we were moved between. Now, these elephants had been put in their very own unique boarding school, but they never got to go home in the holidays. It was their life, living in the man-made playground for us to come and smile. So I've always found zoos quite a challenging place to be in, because I feel their sadness, the separation from their wild, the distance they are from their being able to live within their innateness and their innate ways. What about you? Is that something you've experienced? Is that something you feel in your soul? So this pattern spotting of the generational kind started when I was about 6. I was about 8. I had this experience in the zoo. But what was going on inside of me that connected with what I was processing in my mind? Well, from a young age, from around the age of 7, I developed pains in my right hand hip. I also developed pains in my right hand shoulder. And I used to suffer from a lot of headaches and would walk around like this a lot. There's 3 things going on that right hand side. If you cross this over to Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, that pain in the right hip, that pain in the right shoulder, directly connects to the gallbladder meridian. Now, in Chinese medicine, the gallbladder is not connected. The gallbladder is considered the decision-making organ within. And so from a young age, that meridian was already showing the weight of the ancestral silts that I was holding and carrying within my soul. The headaches down this side, down here, connect directly to a liver that's overheating and having to process the silts that I was unraveling in my mind. Now, there's one thing that this pattern spotting did for me, and that's that it allowed for me to acknowledge that what was going on in my world was not due to me. So I didn't hold this within, but I did carry a torch of something I decided very long ago, that if I didn't want to be part of continuing this broken thread, I would have to do something to ensure that I regathered the wisdom and the knowledge of the wild. And so you see what goes on within us, in our minds and our souls as we grow, and our bodily pains. They're connected, and they really, really matter. And I am just going to briefly now switch to looking at my notes to give you some of the detail, some of the facts that sit within this 3D story that we've shared today of pattern spotting, animals, nature, golden threads, black shadows, silts that we carry in our bodies, pains that you may have had since childhood. I'm a lifelong pain survivor. It's fascinating when you find out in your 40s that you've been, someone says, oh, so you've experienced chronic pain throughout your whole life. And you go, oh yeah, so I have. Do you recognize this about you too? So there is a pioneering psychologist named, oh gosh, here we go with names, Anna Schützenberger. And she referred to what I'm talking about as the ancestral debt, the invisible loyalties that lie within our family lines. She proved that trauma passes down through families. And so my 6-year-old self saw the geometry of this broken family lines before me. I realized it wasn't my fault. And I realized that I could move this shame, this silt, through my body. Now, there's another theorist called Dr. Elaine Aron. Now, the sensory processing side I do, the visual side of it, the pattern spotting side of it, well, and also the sensory processing sensitivity. She talks about what my experience was in the zoo with those animals. My radar was tuned to a higher bandwidth because I recognized the captivity they were in. And that I also was living in the container of the military. But Western medicine and clinical psychology refers to the golden thread and the black shadows that I began pattern spotting as a very young child as intergenerational trauma transmission. I was the symptom bearer the cycle breaker. So in systemic family therapy, one child often unconsciously absorbs the family's repressed grief, the silt, to bring it to the surface. So my pattern spotting wasn't a choice in terms of the golden thread and the black shadow. It was a neurobiological necessity so that I could make sense of the fragmented systems and families that I was being raised in. Now, what's the epigenetic review of this story that we've shared today? So science, specifically the work of Dr. Rachel Yehuda, she validates this. She's validated this golden thread. It's been validated. Research shows that chemical tags attached to our DNA, epigenetics, sits around the outside, based on the traumas of our ancestors. These tags don't change your DNA. They don't change you. But they change how our engines function. So when I was 6 and I discovered that break in the ancestral past, my body was running on a stress blueprint, epigenetics, that was installed by my history and by the lineage and ancestors that came before me. And the hip pain and the shoulder pain was a physical manifestation of epigenetics and the silts that had been left to be cleared by the families down the line. Now, traditional Chinese medicine, I briefly mentioned the fact that this right hip pain and the right shoulder pain connects with the gallbladder meridian. So in traditional Chinese medicine, the liver is the general. It's the general of the body. And it holds the vision. But the gallbladder is the decision maker. It provides the courage to act on what we see. Now, interestingly, my gallbladder was removed 6 years ago, following some really difficult years of trying to deal with my children in school, their mental health and their medical health. Trying to navigate those systems caused me so much chaos that my gallbladder no longer could function, and it was removed. Perhaps you recognize something about that within you too. In Indian Ayurveda, in India, they call the silts the armor. This is the toxic residue that blocks your energy flowing, stagnated livers, liver issues. So just like an engineer, when they need to clean the engine, it requires a slow process of clearing and cleansing. Engineers know if you push all the silt at the bottom of the tank through the engine, it's gonna fuck it up. The system breaks. So what's the somatic and neurobiological review of today's stories? My experience with the elephants was a textbook case of mirror neuron activation. There you go. There's the word I couldn't think of earlier. Mirror neuron activation. My nervous system recognized the functional freeze in those animals because I was living in a container where a part of me was feeling frozen myself. Empathy. When we can feel the earth, feel the essence of the other person. So let's go back to the 3D mind. So clinical neuroscience refers to my dyslexic mind as visual, spatial, holistic processing. And this makes sense to me because it's what I see, it's what I do, it's what I live. And if this is how 1 in 5 of us should be processing and should be using our minds, no wonder we're struggling to put everything into words. So maybe this does reflect something that you have experienced in your life. Maybe you have carried pains, inner pains, since childhood. Maybe you've spent years being told there's nothing wrong with you, or your blood tests come back fine and everything is just okay. But you know inside of you that it's not. Perhaps you recognize yourself within these stories too, because I don't share these to be seen by you. I share these so you can see and begin to see yourself. Now, Western medicine is fantastic at looking and helping us in many situations. But when it comes to lifelong epigenetics, trauma, healing, it doesn't look at us as a whole person. It compartmentalizes us into separate places and doesn't look at us as a whole. If one person had looked at my headaches and migraines, my shoulder pain, my right hip pain, as a young child, instead of just focusing on my right hip pain, perhaps if someone had asked what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your soul, instead of what's just going on with you medically, maybe things would have got to the root of things much quicker. So if you're curious about these things, we will continue our journey across the year. It's a slow process. We're going slow and steady. But if you've enjoyed today and you've enjoyed the processings of a 3D visual thinking dyslexic mind, then you can join me next week on Chapter 3. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a pleasure sitting with you under the tree. And talk to you soon.